There was nothing visibly broken about the house Sara grew up in. The paint wasn't peeling. The windows weren't shattered. There were no neighbors whispering about chaos behind closed doors. From the outside, it looked stable. Ordinary, safe, but inside that house, something essential was missing. Love never echoed there. No one screamed insults. No one slammed doors in rage. Her parents provided food, clothes, school supplies. They attended parent-teacher meetings. They paid the bills on time. On paper, it was enough. But children don't grow on paper. They grow on warmth, on affection, on feeling seen, and that was the part that never arrived. Sara's earliest memory wasn't of a birthday party or bedtime stories. It was of sitting at the dining table, legs swinging slightly above the floor, listening to the sound of forks against plates. Her father read the newspaper. Her mother scrolled through her phone. The television murmured in the background. No one asked her how school was. No one noticed she had stopped talking halfway through a sentence. It wasn't cruelty, it was absence, and absence, when repeated daily, becomes a message. The message Sara absorbed was simple but devastating. You are not important enough to be noticed. As a child, she didn't have the language to describe emotional neglect. She didn't know words like validation, attachment, or affection deprivation. She only knew the tight feeling in her chest when she wanted to show her drawing and no one looked up. So she adapted. When she brought home perfect grades, she hoped for excitement. Instead, she received a nod. Good, that's what you're supposed to do. When she tried to talk about a fight with a friend, her mother said, "It's not a big deal. Focus on your studies." When she cried quietly in her room, no one knocked on the door. Over time, she stopped expecting them to. Children are wired to believe their caregivers are right. So when love feels distant, they don't question the caregivers. They question themselves. Maybe I'm too sensitive. Maybe I talk too much. Maybe I should need less. Sara became observant, hyper, aware of everyone else's moods. She learned to scan the room before speaking. If her father looked stressed, she stayed silent. If her mother seemed irritated, she made herself smaller. She became the easy child. Teachers praised her independence. Relatives admired how mature she seemed. She doesn't cause any trouble, they would say proudly, but no one asked why a child felt the need to take up so little space. At night, when the house was quiet, Sara would lie awake staring at the ceiling. She imagined a different version of her life, one where someone sat beside her bed and asked about her fears, one where she was hugged without needing to achieve something first. She would replay small moments in her head, like the time she got second place in a school competition and walked home alone because no one could come. She told herself it didn't matter, but it did. Each unnoticed moment stacked quietly inside her. Love, she learned, was conditional. It came in the form of expectations, performance, responsibility. If she excelled, she was acceptable. If she struggled, she was inconvenient, so she stopped struggling, at least publicly. By middle school, Sara had mastered emotional self-sufficiency. She didn't ask for help with homework even when she was confused. She didn't tell anyone when classmates teased her. She handled everything alone because needing felt dangerous. Needing meant risking disappointment. And disappointment hurt more than silence. Inside her, though, something fragile was forming. A deep, unshakable belief that she was fundamentally unlovable unless she proved her worth. She became a perfectionist, not out of ambition but fear. If she was perfect, maybe she wouldn't be ignored. If she was useful, maybe she wouldn't be invisible. When her parents argued, she blamed herself for not being good enough to keep the peace. When they seemed distant, she tried harder at school. When they forgot important dates in her life, she pretended she didn't care. Children don't stop loving their parents when they feel unloved. They love harder. They twist themselves into smaller, more convenient versions, hoping to finally earn the affection they crave. Sara didn't resent her parents. She defended them. They're just busy. She told friends, they do a lot for me, and that was true. But providing survival is not the same as providing connection. The absence of emotional warmth shaped her nervous system in ways she wouldn't understand until years later. She became easily anxious when someone's tone changed. She overthought simple conversations. She felt responsible for other people's feelings. She confused attachment with anxiety because love in her childhood had always felt uncertain. By the time she reached her teenage years, she appeared strong, independent, self-contained. But strength built from emotional deprivation carries a hidden cost. She didn't know how to identify her own needs. When friends asked what she wanted, she shrugged. When teachers encouraged her to express herself, she hesitated. Her feelings felt blurry, undefined. No one had ever mirrored them back to her. Emotions that are never acknowledged start to feel illegitimate. So she minimized everything. It's fine. It doesn't matter. I'm okay. Those became her default answers. Inside, though, there was still a small child sitting at that dinner table, waiting for someone to look up and truly see her. The lifelong effect of not being loved as a child isn't always loud. It doesn't always show up as rebellion or chaos. Sometimes it looks like extreme independence. Sometimes it looks like people pleasing. Sometimes it looks like a quiet ache that follows you into every room. Sara didn't grow up in a house filled with hatred. She grew up in a house where love was never expressed. And that difference changed everything, because a child can survive without luxury. A child can survive without perfection. But a child who grows up without feeling deeply loved carries that emptiness into adulthood like an invisible weight. The house she lived in never echoed with laughter or reassurance. And years later, even when she stepped into new spaces, new relationships, new opportunities, the silence echoed inside her. Years later, Sara fell in love. Or at least she thought she did. His name was Daniel. He wasn't dramatic. He wasn't unpredictable. He didn't play games. He was steady in a way that felt foreign to her nervous system. He texted her good morning. He asked how her meetings went. He remembered that she hated loud restaurants and preferred quiet cafes. He noticed when her voice sounded tired. At first, it felt magical. Then it started to feel dangerous. Because when you grow up without consistent love, stability doesn't feel safe. It feels suspicious. Sara had spent her childhood learning that affection could disappear without warning. That attention was temporary. That closeness could turn into distance overnight. So when Daniel showed up consistently, her mind searched for the hidden expiration date. Why is he being this kind? What if he's pretending? How long until he realizes I'm too much? The smallest changes triggered her. If he replied an hour later than usual, her chest tightened. If he seemed distracted during a call, she assumed she had done something wrong. If he needed space after a stressful day, she heard it as rejection. Her body reacted before logic could intervene. Anxiety doesn't ask for permission, it just arrives. Daniel once told her, "You don't have to earn being here. I want you here." The words were beautiful, but they didn't land, because deep inside, Sara still believed love was conditional. So she tried to secure it the only way she knew how, by overgiving. She cooked for him when she was exhausted. She rearranged her schedule to match his. She made herself endlessly available. She listened carefully to every complaint, every fear, every dream. She became indispensable, but she never allowed herself to simply be. When Daniel complimented her, she deflected. When he reassured her, she needed more reassurance. When he showed affection, she felt relief instead of joy. Relief that he hadn't left, that was the problem. Love felt like something she had to constantly maintain, monitor, protect. She didn't know how to relax inside it. One evening, after a small disagreement about weekend plans, Sara shut down completely. Her tone became distant, her responses short. Daniel looked confused. "It's just a schedule change. Why does it feel like you're pulling away?" She didn't know how to explain that to her. A minor change felt like the beginning of abandonment, because as a child, emotional shifts were never explained. Distance just happened, and she had learned to prepare for loss before it arrived. So she tested him. Not consciously, not maliciously, but she did. She would withdraw slightly to see if he noticed. She would hint at leaving to see if he fought for her. She would create emotional tension just to measure his commitment. If he chased, she felt temporarily secure. If he didn't respond strongly enough, her fears intensified. It was exhausting for both of them. The truth was painful. She didn't know how to receive stable love without bracing for impact. Healthy relationships require vulnerability. They require trust that closeness won't vanish the moment you relax. But Sara's childhood had trained her differently. Vulnerability had once led to silence. Needs had once led to dismissal. Emotions had once been minimized, so as an adult she armored herself in independence and anxiety. When Daniel said, "Why do you always assume I'm going to leave?" it hit something deep, because she did assume that. Not because of him, but because of history. Eventually, the strain began to show. Daniel grew tired of proving something he had never threatened to take away. Sara grew tired of feeling constantly afraid in a relationship that was supposed to feel safe. They loved each other, but love alone couldn't outpace unhealed wounds. When the relationship ended, it wasn't explosive. It was quiet, heavy, full of things neither of them fully understood. Sara sat alone in her apartment that night, staring at her phone. The old narrative returned immediately. You're too needy. You're too anxious. You ruin good things. But for the first time, she paused before fully believing it. Instead of blaming herself completely, she asked a different question. Where did this fear start? And that question changed everything. She began to notice patterns stretching back years. Not just with Daniel, but in friendships, workplaces, every dynamic where closeness was involved. She overperformed, she overanalyzed, she anticipated rejection before it happened. She realized her reactions weren't random. They were learned. The little girl who once sat unnoticed at the dinner table had grown up, but she was still waiting to be chosen. Still scanning for signs of emotional withdrawal, still equating attention with safety. Her anxiety wasn't proof she was broken. It was proof she had adapted to survive emotional uncertainty. Understanding this didn't magically heal her, but it softened her self-judgment. Instead of saying, "I'm hard to love," she began saying, "I learned love in a way that made it hard to trust." That shift mattered. Healing, she discovered, wasn't about becoming less emotional. It was about becoming more aware. She started practicing small things. When she felt anxious, she named it instead of acting on it. When she needed reassurance, she tried to ask directly instead of testing. When someone showed consistency, she reminded herself that stability isn't a trick. Some days were easier than others. There were moments she still felt the urge to pull away first, just to avoid being left, moments when silence felt safer than honesty. But slowly she began separating her past from her present. The lifelong effect of not being loved as a child doesn't disappear once you enter adulthood. It echoes in your relationships. It shows up in your fears. It whispers worst case scenarios when someone gets close. But echoes are not permanent. They fade when confronted with awareness, patience, and self-compassion. Sarah's story isn't about blaming her parents. It's about recognizing that emotional absence shapes attachment. And more importantly, it's about realizing that those patterns can be rewritten. She may not have been deeply loved in the way she needed as a child. But as an adult, she began learning something powerful. She could choose relationships that were steady. She could learn to tolerate safety. She could give herself the validation she once begged for silently. And maybe, just maybe, love wasn't something she had to earn. It was something she could finally learn to hold.